discussions are different from book presentations, I feel. And so I'm going to start by giving you the briefest description of the Manor itself and also of my involvement there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about architecture and architectural symbolism and metaphor. Because you all have houses, and they all have a meaning for you, which doesn't have anything to do with just the bricks and mortar. Am I right? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the meanings that we can attach to three places that belong to three people that I'm going to talk about? But first of all, I should say, I asked the question before, how many of you have been to Sylvester Manor on Shelter Island? I know one of you has. Yeah. Well, I urge you to go, and I urge you to, particularly after this talk about architecture, I might read a little bit, to see a place that is a living organism still today. The place was founded in 1651. You can look it up. Here's Modern Times. You can look it up online at sylvestermanor.org. And you also can walk around a site which is one of the historic sites of national importance in this country. Because it's a place where the kind of multicultural civilization that we're still working on quite hard today to try and bring it to something better than it is, began when Africans and Europeans, both English and Dutch, stepped ashore between 1651 and 1653. So the place is 243 acres of land, open land, most of which has been given into the public trust because the agricultural rights were purchased by the town of Shelter Island, the state, and the feds, who, if there's a good thing going, always like to horn in on it, right? So they did, and I think it's all but 40 acres of the site are now open forever, and much of it is now an organic farm. And you can go there in the summertime and buy wonderful vegetables. You can become a member of the organic farm, and as late as November, you can buy terrific cold hardy greens, great different kinds of rutabagas and other turnips. So it's a going organization. When I first came there in 1984, long before I even thought about writing this book, I was amazed to see this place that was so far back there. Even then, I didn't know how far back it was. I knew the house was built in 1737, but I didn't know that a full century before that, there had been sugar merchants there, as well as Manhassets. Manhassets, I don't always be thinking about that because Manhasset is the mall. But the Manhassets were the inhabitants of Shelter Island. And the chief of all Long Island, the head sachem of Long Island, Ogatica, also known as Yoko, lived there on Shelter Island. That was his own personal home in the Hamptons, so to speak. And so to be there in 1984 and to meet Andrew Fisk, who was the 10th generation of the same family, to be there was to shake the hand of history. It was just amazing. And then there was his wife, the remarkable Alice Hench Fisk, who wore all her gold jewelry in the garden. She was a ferocious gardener. She wore mob caps at all times outdoors. A mob cap is what you see in 18th century paintings. It's a close-fitting chintz hat, kind of slightly bulbous, with a rim that goes all the way around. Think Colonial Williamsburg, think Old Sturbridge Village, you're there. So I met those two in '84, but I had no intention of writing a book about the place. I put it in a book that I wrote a bit later, but it wasn't until I got archaeologists to come that I realized that the great story was the story of the voices that were unheard in documents. It was the story of both Native Americans and was a term that was originally dreamed up to describe the people of any ancestry born on this side of the Atlantic. So the children of European colonists were Creoles, and the children of Africans, and the children of mixed race, who were also called Mustees, of Native Americans and Africans together, were all Creoles. Eventually, of course, if you go to Louisiana, Creole also means probably the most delicious and most mixed up cooking in the nation. So again, it's about being a mixed evolution of cooking in Louisiana. So the three places. The first place is a garden in England, in London. And you'll find that in chapter, they'll help me out. It's chapter 6, called Before the Whirlwind. And it's about the life of a very settled family in England who were what were called metropolitan gentry. Gentry folk who didn't own land, but they lived in the city. And the house belonged to someone called Thomas Brindley, who was one of the only eight auditors of the exchequer of Charles I. So what did that garden behind a house in London mean? We have it on a plan of 1676. That's the other thing about Sylvester Manor and everything that went before and everything that's come since. If you just sit still long enough, you'll find it's all there. It's completely remarkable. So, what did that garden mean? It was a classic 17th century Renaissance garden. It was 4 quarters with paths that crossed it like this. The plan doesn't tell us what the paths were made of, but if they were like everybody else's paths in metropolitan London in 1636, the year that she was born, they were gravel paths. And 2 of the plats, or sections, were probably turf, so that Thomas Brindley, who didn't exactly have all that easy a life, and I'll tell you why in a minute, probably strolled up and down, looking at the grass for comfort and walking on the gravel paths to keep his feet dry in London, which was just as wet then as it is now. And the other 2 parts of the garden were probably for use. They may have been for vegetables, they may have been for ornamental flowers, but what was the symbolic meaning of this garden? It showed that you had enough land to be able to devote some of it to purely ornamental uses. Grass. Didn't really, that's ornamental. It was walled with brick. The archaeology has been done in London, as it's been done here at Sylvester Manor. And against those walls was espaliered the most amazing array of fruit trees, because they didn't have much sugar. So summer fruit was sugar for them. Apricots, many different kinds of pears, cherries, both sour and sweet. And so in the spring, what you saw was this great array of flowering trees, the green grass, and the 2 other parts, the 2 other quadrants, which symbolized, and actually were, plenty. Meant that you actually had enough to eat besides what you could buy. Meat from nearby Smithfield, right down the street. The house is not there anymore. The garden is not there anymore. But if you go to London, you will find that you can walk through the gate under which Griswold Brindley Sylvester, born in 1636, walked. Is called St. John's Gate. Survived the Blitz, has survived everything from the Middle Ages, when it was part of a priory, until now. And so, if you go to London, and you've read my book, be sure to go see St. John's Gate. And you can walk down St. John's Lane, and past the place where this house fronted on the lane, and behind it was this garden, with its metaphorical weight of both luxury, the grass, and plenty. The other lovely thing that the archaeologists discovered was that they found a pile, a midden. How many of you know the word midden? trash heap.
Mhm.